The clock read 6:47 p.m. Margaret Cole, 69 years old, sat in her worn velvet chair by the living room window. The same chair she had bought with her first paycheck decades ago, nursed her daughter in, and wept in quietly the night her husband Harold passed away. The evening news murmured from the television. Every night, from 6:30 to 7:00, she allowed herself this one small window of stillness, 30 minutes. That was all she asked from a day spent tiptoeing through her own home, cooking meals that were criticized more than complimented, and sleeping in the smallest bedroom of a house she had paid for with 30 years of honest work. It had started 4 years ago when her daughter Rachel and Rachel's husband Evan moved in. Just for a few months, Rachel had said. Evan had lost his job again. They couldn't make rent. Margaret opened her door without hesitation because that was what mothers did. But a few months became a year became 4. And somewhere in those years, Margaret's home stopped being hers. First, Evan rearranged her kitchen, then the garage became his workshop, then the living room was reorganized for his massive television. Margaret's chair was pushed to a corner near the hallway like an afterthought. She didn't complain. She adjusted. She told herself it was temporary. Then on this Tuesday evening, Evan walked in wearing sweatpants, smelling like stale coffee. He picked up the remote, clicked the television off, and dropped onto the couch. Without looking at her, he said, "Get out, old woman. Go to your room. This living room is mine now." Margaret turned toward the doorway where Rachel had just appeared holding grocery bags. Rachel had heard everything. Margaret could see the flicker of shame in her eyes. But Rachel looked at the floor, shifted her weight, and walked to the kitchen without a word. That silence was louder than anything Evan had ever said. Margaret looked at her hands, weathered hands that had filed thousands of documents, cooked 10,000 meals, held a baby, buried a husband, and built a life brick by brick. These hands had earned every inch of this house. Yet here she sat, dismissed like hired help. Something shifted inside her. Not rage. Clarity. The kind that comes from 1,000 small surrenders finally reaching collapse. She stood up, walked to the hallway, picked up her purse, took her car keys, put on her coat, and left. She did not slam the door. She did not cry. 20 minutes later, she checked into the Crestfield Hotel downtown. She sat on the bed in her coat, stared at the wall, then reached into her purse and pulled out an old leather folder. Margaret had worked at the County Land Records Office for 32 years. She started as a filing clerk at 23 and retired as a senior records administrator at 55. In those decades, she processed tens of thousands of property deeds, title transfers, and mortgage documents. She saw families torn apart over land, siblings suing each other over half-acre lots, widows losing everything because they never read the fine print. Those years taught her one unshakable truth: feelings fade, promises are forgotten, memories become unreliable. But paper endures. Paper does not look away in the doorway while your dignity is stripped from you. She opened the leather folder. Inside was the deed to her home at 412 Birchwood Lane, the paid-in-full mortgage satisfaction letter from 2003, property tax receipts filed chronologically every single year, her name on every one. Margaret Ann Cole, sole owner. There was no lease agreement with Evan and Rachel, no rental contract, no written arrangement. They had moved in on a handshake and a mother's love. She dialed an old friend, Daniel Price, a 71-year-old semi-retired property lawyer. She told him everything, the 4 years. the slow erosion, the moment in the living room. Rachel's silence. Daniel confirmed that without a lease or rent exchanged, Evan and Rachel were merely occupants by consent. Margaret had every legal right to revoke that consent with proper notice. 30 days. He could have the paperwork drafted that night. Margaret looked at the deed in her hands. Her name. Her house. Her life. She told Daniel to draft the papers. She had been gentle for 4 years, and gentle was what got her to this hotel room. At 8:15 the next morning, a legal associate knocked on the door of 412 Birchwood Lane and handed Evan a notice of termination of occupancy. 30 days to vacate. Contact information for the property owner's attorney included. Rachel called within the hour, sobbing that Margaret couldn't do this, that it was their home. Margaret waited for the crying to thin, then replied steadily that it was not their home. It was a house she bought, paid for, and allowed them to stay in. That allowance had ended. She told Rachel she loved her, but love was not the same as permission. Not anymore. Then she hung up. That afternoon, Margaret called her bank and canceled the 2 supplementary credit cards she had added to her account 3 years ago. One for Rachel, one for Evan. Both canceled immediately. That evening, Evan stood at a grocery store register. His card was declined. He swiped again. Declined. A third time while the cashier stared, and the line grew. He called Margaret from the parking lot, shaking with fury, demanding to know how she could humiliate him like that. Margaret replied quietly that humiliation was being told to get out of your own living room by a man who never paid a single bill in your house. What he felt at that register was just a minor inconvenience. Then she hung up. 5 days later, a meeting was arranged at Daniel's law office, a small conference room with beige walls and fluorescent lighting, Margaret and Daniel on one side, Rachel and Evan on the other. Evan had dressed up in a sport coat and collared shirt. He spoke first, leaning forward with exaggerated confidence, saying this had gotten out of hand, that they were family. He claimed he had been making investments and building toward buying their own place within the year. Margaret said nothing. She reached into her leather folder and slid several sheets of paper across the table. Bank statements, every line highlighted, cash advances from Margaret's credit cards funneled into a personal brokerage account, losing trades, failed bets on meme stocks and cryptocurrency, a margin call from 6 months ago, a personal loan taken out in Rachel's name without Rachel's knowledge to cover the losses. Evan's smile evaporated. Rachel stared at the papers, face pale, hands trembling. Margaret spoke softly. She told Rachel that Evan had said he was saving, that he had a plan, that he was building something. He had been lying for years, using Margaret's house and money to prop up those lies. Rachel asked Evan if it was true. He stammered about unpredictable markets and numbers not telling the whole story. Rachel asked again. He went silent. Margaret stood, gathered her papers, and looked at her daughter one final time. She said she would always love Rachel, but would not set herself on fire to keep someone else warm. Rachel could stay tied to a man who spent 4 years spending her future, or build something of her own. Margaret would not finance either decision. She walked out. Behind her, she heard Evan telling Rachel to come on and go home to talk. Then she heard Rachel say clearly that she was not getting in the car with him. Margaret reclaimed her home slowly. She hired a painter and chose warm peach for the living room walls. She moved her chair back to the window with a small side table, a lamp, and books. She replanted Harold's garden with tomatoes, basil, and marigolds. She changed the locks, not from fear, but from principle. Then, one Saturday, she invited the neighborhood women over for tea. Helen from next door, Doris from church, Patricia, Yolanda, and women she barely knew who had heard what she had done. They sat in her living room drinking tea from mismatched cups while Margaret told her story. Not for sympathy, but because she could see from some of their faces that she was not the only woman made to feel like a stranger in her own life. She told them that ownership is not just about deeds and titles, it is about the right to choose who sits at your table. The right to say, "This is mine and you are welcome," but only as long as you respect what mine means. She told them that love without boundaries becomes exploitation. It does not matter how good your intentions are, if you do not draw a line, someone will walk over you and call it closeness. She told them that silence in the face of disrespect is not peace, it is permission. Every time she said nothing when Evan belittled her, she was not keeping the peace. She was teaching him there was no cost to cruelty, and she told them that saying no at the right moment does not destroy a family. It reveals one. It shows you who was there for love and who was there for convenience. That revelation may hurt more than anything. But the truth, unlike promises, unlike excuses, unlike silence, does not decay. The room was quiet. The clock ticked. The light through the curtains was golden. Margaret picked up her teacup, took a slow sip, and smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, but the small, steady smile of a woman who had finally come home. The strongest thing I ever did was not fight. It was refuse to disappear.